The New York Giants 2025 preseason is in the books, and it was as close to perfect as perfect can be. Locked on Giants starts right now.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all of my written work. And as always, we welcome on in our Blue Crew community members, our everydayers, our newcomers, and everybody in between. And we thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, Giant fans, 2025 preseason is done. Roster decisions, a lot of tough roster decisions are still to be made. But just what we're going to do on today's show is we're going to talk about the Giants offense, which has really been the storyline, I think, this summer. So we'll talk a little bit about what they have done on offense, some trends that they did during the preseason that I hope are going to carry over into the regular season. Then in segment 2, I've got some thoughts about the quarterback situation, the Giants quarterback room. Wow, what an upgrade it's been, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then in segment 3, I'm going to give you an update on my roster projections. Now, I did a roster projection show earlier in the week, so I'm just going to update. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm just going to tell you where I have changes and why I have changes. And then, of course, we'll wrap it up with some final thoughts. So that's what we've got on tap for today here on the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, welcome on in to everybody. All right, the New York Giants are coming off of a 42-10 victory over the New England Patriots. Now, I've always said when it comes to the preseason games, don't get too high or too low over the score. Look in terms of the individual performances, how, the number of mistakes, maybe some of the things that the coaches are doing. Folks, there was a lot to like about the New York Giants this summer, and in particular, the offense. Okay, in 3 games, the Giants scored 107 points. And if we're going to put that into perspective, that is 17 more points than what they scored in the final 5 games last season. Okay, the Giants against the Patriots, who admittedly didn't play their starters, not that the Giants played their starters either. So you can kind of say it was kind of even because you had the backups against the backups, but the Giants were able to get 5 touchdowns from the 3 quarterbacks that played. Okay, Russell Wilson was the only quarterback that did not play for the Giants. None of the first team starters really played for the Giants on either side of the ball, which was kind of expected. And I'll go into that in the next segment a little bit. But, the biggest takeaway, I think, for the Giants this preseason is that these wins that they have had in which they have scored over 30 points in each game, this is going to build confidence for what is ultimately going to be the 53-man roster. I mean, after a while, when you keep losing games, whether it be preseason, regular season, or whatever, suddenly that loser mentality seeps into your mindset. And you just look at the Giants on the bench during these games when they're scoring. I have never seen, at least not in recent years, I have never seen such enthusiasm, such interest. You didn't see anybody sitting on the bench sulking or looking around or looking at the crowd or whatever. They were engaged. And when you are engaged, the psychological effect means that it's going to usually work out well for you. It's going to turn out to be a positive factor. And I just think that's a big takeaway from this preseason because this team, even though the games don't count, the results of the games don't count, this team now is seeing and learning what it takes to win. And you have to remember, this was a renovated roster, an upgraded roster, starting with the quarterbacks right down to the defense. And just the mere fact that they're building this foundation, or they built this foundation, it should serve them well going into the regular season. Now, let's take a look at the offense. All right, I want to focus on that. So I went into Pro Football Focus to get what the Giants did on offense, different types of plays. Like, for example, how many times were they under center, how many RPOs, deep passes, motion, and all that stuff. The biggest takeaway I'm going to give you, and I'll give you the other numbers in just a minute, but the biggest takeaway I'm going to give you, the screen game. Right now, when was the last time that you can remember the Giants running an effective screen game? You'd have to go back a few years. Well, folks, this summer, the screen game was on point. The Giants ran the screen 13 times, which was tied for most in the NFL with the Bucs. And according to PFF, the average yards they picked up per play when they ran a screen, 5 yards. Not bad. I mean, how many times have we seen in the past the Giants screen game get blown up? 5 yards per play, that's half of what you need for the next set of downs. Not bad, folks. Very encouraging. And, whether that's offensive line blocking, quarterback play, just the whole design and execution, whatever it is, that is a huge, huge upgrade for the Giants, and something that I think is underrated when we talk about what the Giants accomplished this summer. Now, for those of you who are wondering, what else did they do as far as the offensive play calling goes? They were under center 68 times. That was important too, because remember, they had a rookie quarterback with Jackson Dart, a guy who really, I don't think, was under center a whole lot at Ole Miss. They did play action 48 times. RPOs 29 times. And of the 29, 19 of those RPOs were runs. They attempted 18 deep passes, and they were in motion 57 times. Right now, to put it in perspective, there were 202 offensive plays run this preseason. So a nice mixture here. They diversified the offense. And I don't know what's going to carry over into the regular season, because the preseason is also a time to kind of experiment and see, what works, what doesn't work, what looks good, what might we be able to run. So the bottom line with this offense is there was a lot to really like about what they did. Now, there was some stuff not to like. There were drop passes. For example, Jackson Dart, when he got his start, I think his numbers, he had 3 drop passes against him, right? 2 of which were by Jalen Hyatt, which was kind of disappointing. But overall, folks, I would say this offense vastly improved. And you could point to that either being a result of Mike Kafka calling the plays if you want. You could point to improved quarterback play, which has had an effect on the offensive line looking better. You can look at any factor that you want. But the bottom line is this is finally looking like a competent NFL offense after years and years of the offense just being such a dismal showing week after week with few exceptions. Mm-hmm. So a lot to be encouraged by from the preseason. And, the big question mark now is, can they carry it over to the regular season? I have no reason to think they won't. But we'll see, of course. All right, Giant fans, coming up next, some thoughts on the play by the quarterbacks. That's coming up right after this. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back and in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. This year, I'm going to play on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. Whether you're all in on something new or you like sticking to head-to-head leagues or jumping into public leagues, Yahoo has you covered. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick it off, they just dropped the Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, which is a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now is the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. And if you're more into the classics, you could still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to Locked On Giants. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up next week on the Locked On Giants podcast, I'll probably have a guest on for you just to get some different perspectives on, what we saw in the preseason, the roster. And speaking of the roster, the cutdown day is Tuesday, so we will have that as soon as the roster is finalized, or the initial 53-man roster, I should say. It's never really finalized a roster because there will be tweaks. So we'll have some reactions on that, surprises, things that kind of, we expected. So we've got so much more coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast as training camp comes to an official end on August 31st. And then we're into the season, and there's a lot to be excited for, finally, for the Giant fans when it comes to the season. All right. Now, let's take a look at the quarterback play, all right? Jackson Dart got the start, which I kind of expected was going to be the case. And the reason Jackson Dart got that start was because, look, he has passed just about every test that has been thrown his way. If you go back to the start of training camp, and maybe even before that in the springtime, Jackson Dart has been called upon to go into a practice rep unexpectedly. He's had expected practice reps, planned practice reps, and each time he has responded well. If you go back to the Jets game, there was that one time when they pulled out Russell Wilson and they sent Jackson Dart in. That was planned, all right? It was unexpected for Dart, who didn't think he was going to go in at that moment, but that was Dable testing Dart. And as I've been telling you all along, Dable has thrown every single thing possible at this kid. So the next logical step for Jackson Dart was to say, okay, Jackson, you're going to be the starter. Let's see how you prepare as the starter. And judging by the kid's performance, did pretty well. Now, the one thing he didn't do well that he has to learn, and he acknowledged it, Brian Dable acknowledged it, I think everybody acknowledges it, is he has to learn how to slide when he becomes a runner. All right? I see shades of Daniel Jones when I see Jackson Dart taking off and not sliding. And that makes me very concerned. So hopefully Jackson Dart is not so hardwired that he won't at least try to learn how to slide if he takes off as a runner. Because, look, we don't want him getting hurt. And as it turned out, on that one scramble that he had, I think it went for 23 yards, he got dinged. And they took him off the field. That was at the end of the first quarter, towards the end of the first quarter. They took him off the field to be evaluated for a head injury, which thankfully he did not have. So we don't want Jackson Dart, when he eventually takes over the reins of the offense, we don't want him having to be pulled out of games to be checked for head injuries. Not at all. Okay, so Jackson Dart had himself a day. He was followed by Jameis Winston, who also had himself a day. Jameis Winston came right in on that one play and boom, threw a touchdown pass. I mean, what can you say about Jameis Winston? He is fast becoming one of my favorite players on this team, just for his personality and his quirkiness and just, the fact that he's not such a bad player. But, I want to talk about Tommy DeVito because, I brought this up on the program before, and some of you have poo-pooed this idea that I've had. And I said, a while ago, I said, if I'm the Giants, I look to see if I can't trade Tommy DeVito to a team. And a lot of you responded, what are they going to get for Tommy DeVito? Who's going to trade for him? He's going to get cut. He's going to hit the waiver wire and somebody's going to pick him up. Well, folks, as I've said before, the waiver wire order is based on the first round draft order from this past April, and it will be that way until the third week of the season. By my estimation, there are 6 teams that I identified that could use an upgrade at backup quarterback. All right. I think we can probably agree that Tommy DeVito has graduated from just a third string quarterback to maybe a second string quarterback, a guy who can go in there if you need him to go in there for a game or two to get the job done. All right. So here are the teams that I identified could make sense if the Giants wanted to try and swing a trade. And to give you some additional context, I'm going to tell you where they are in the waiver wire order, and I'm going to try and prioritize this for you. Okay, the Titans come to mind. They sit first in the waiver wire order. So obviously, if they wanted to take their chances and say, you know what, we're eyeing DeVito, so what? We'll wait. They can. Then number 7, the New York Jets. Now they have Tyrod Taylor, but Tyrod Taylor, remember, he had knee surgery. And while it is anticipated he will be ready to go, who knows, all right? The Jets have something like 10 draft picks, including 4 picks in the 6th round. They certainly have the assets if they wanted to give them up for Tommy DeVito, okay? Now, next, the New Orleans Saints. The Saints are 9th in the priority order. Can anybody tell me if the Saints quarterback situation down there is stable, or are there still questions? If you're going to make the argument, well, the Saints should trade for Jameis Winston, well, Winston, according to Brandon Brown, isn't going anywhere. So maybe if the Saints want one of the quarterbacks, maybe you say, hey, we'll give you DeVito for a draft pick. Why not, right? Okay, after that, the Colts, who are 14th in the waiver wire order. Now, the Colts just named old friend Daniel Jones as their starter. Anthony Richardson, for now, is going to be the backup. But who's to say the Colts won't unload Richardson? Because maybe they've given up on him. So would a Jones-DeVito reunion make sense for them? Possibly. Okay, after the Colts, the Vikings. Who's backing up J.J. McCarthy out there, right? The Vikings are 24th in the waiver wire order. Think they could use a good backup out there? I do. Then you've got the Rams, who are 26th in the waiver wire order. The Rams, of course, they have Matthew Stafford, but Stafford has had the back issue. They've got Jimmy Garoppolo behind him. What happens if Stafford's back acts up again? Now you've got Jimmy G as your starter, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but who do you have after that? That could be a sticky situation if you are the Los Angeles Rams. And you know what? I'm going to give you one more. And I know this is a long shot, but I'll give you one more for what it's worth. What about the Chiefs? Now, the Chiefs, of course, have Patrick Mahomes, but behind him, Gardner Minshew. The Chiefs are 31st in the waiver wire order. So you don't think Tommy DeVito wouldn't be an upgrade over Minshew? I think he might. So my point being, folks, is in all likelihood, yes, the Giants will probably end up waiving DeVito, and he will probably sign someplace, whether it be on a practice squad or a 53-man roster. I don't think the Giants, if they waive him, they're going to be able to get him through to the practice squad. And quite honestly, I think keeping 4 quarterbacks would be a bit much. If I'm Joe Shane, I see if I can't work out a deal. And I know a lot of you are going to say it's not going to happen, but never say never. I mean, DeVito looked good this preseason. And like I said, those teams that I just mentioned to you, they all probably could use a good backup quarterback or quarterback depth in general. And I didn't even throw in Cleveland, okay, which is, you can make a case for being another team. So I do think there could be a market for Tommy DeVito. And I'd be curious to hear what you guys, especially you folks who poo-pooed the idea, if you still feel that there's no market for him. So we'll find out in a few days if there is or isn't, but that's how I kind of see it. All right, coming up next, Giant fans, my roster projection updates. So don't go anywhere. I've got some changes from the show I did the other day. I'll tell you who, what, where, when, and why right after this. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything: cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With so much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You get real personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something you saw on social media. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, serving more than 5 million people. It's easy to fit into your schedule. Just click to connect, and you can even switch therapists anytime if you need to. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and the preseason's in the books. And, I titled this show, a near perfect preseason. And despite the winning and everything, there is one thing I want to say before I get into this last segment, and is I want to send shout out and thoughts to cornerback TJ Moore. For those of you who didn't get a chance to see the game or haven't heard, TJ Moore suffered what looked to be a non-contact knee injury. And he was down on the ground. Teammates gathered around him. They put him on a cart, his leg in an air cast. All right, this happened late in the game. And you just feel for guys like this because, this is a young man. He probably wasn't going to make the roster anyway, but just because he would have made the Giants roster, this doesn't mean that maybe another team wouldn't have taken a flyer on him, whether it be on their practice squad or whatever. And now, unfortunately, his football dreams, life in the NFL, they're going to have to be put on hold for at least a year, depending on what he had. I don't know if it was an ACL or an Achilles or what exactly he had, but my heart goes out to the young man who, by the way, after the game, there was an ambulance waiting to take him to a local hospital. So I really hope he is going to be okay. So I just wanted to put that out there before I get into this last segment. And this last segment, of course, is an update. Speaking of rosters, an update to my roster projection. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the entire projection because if you want to check that out, I'll link that show for you. I'm just going to go over the changes that I have, having seen the last preseason game, because there were some guys that when I initially made my 53-man roster projection, I wasn't quite sure, how it might play out. But now I've got some revisions for you. So basically, quarterback, running back, tight ends, I have no changes. My first change comes on the offensive line, where initially I had Aaron Stinney making the roster. I'm going to replace him with Joshua Ezeudu. I think Joshua Ezeudu had a really good summer, did nothing against the Patriots to convince me that, it was a mirage the first two games. I think Joshua Ezeudu has earned a spot on this roster. As a matter of fact, I would say probably one of the most improved guys from last year, from the carryover from last year. All right, wide receiver, I can't put Bo Collins on this roster. I'm sorry. Bo Collins had a couple of drops, including one on a third down. I can't put him on this roster. What I can do, though, and what I have done, is I replaced Bo Collins with Gunnar Olszewski. Now, that gives them two guys, because I also have Amir Smith-Marset on the roster. So that gives them two potential returners. And if you think about it, that's not such a crazy thought. I mean, last year, they had Amir Smith-Marset and Eric Gray was a returner. Well, Eric Gray is going to be on PUP to start the year. So now they have Gunnar Olszewski. So maybe Amir Smith-Marset does punts and maybe Olszewski does kickoff returns or vice versa. Who knows? But I think Gunnar Olszewski has done enough to earn a spot on this roster. So that was the other change I had on offense. All right, now on defense, few changes there. Actually, across the board, a few changes. On the defensive line, I moved Chauncey Golston out of defensive line and I put him with the outside linebacker group. So I'll get to that in a moment. But I replaced Golston with DJ Davidson. DJ Davidson had himself a really good game last night. And I just can't leave him off the roster. I think he's had a good summer, a good preseason. So I cannot leave DJ Davidson off the roster. Okay, no changes at inside linebacker. Outside linebacker, as I mentioned, I moved Chauncey Golston over to outside linebacker group, which means Trace Ford, who I initially had making the roster, gets bumped to the practice squad. At safety, all right, there's been some injuries at safety. So this is a position that I fully expect Joe Shane to keep an active eye out for on the waiver wire, because right now, Tyler Nubin is ailing. Dane Belton has an issue. I thought they said on the pregame show that Javon Holland did too, but I wasn't quite sure. So I don't know what his status is. But Kevon Wallace, I know was banged up earlier in the year. But anyway, I replaced Kevon Wallace with Raheem Lane. If Raheem Lane is healthy, I think he makes the team. I think Makari Page, practice squad. And I do think that another safety is probably going to be brought in off the waiver wire. Who that is, I don't know. We'll have to see who hits the waiver wire. Then at cornerback, that was where I had my last change. Initially, I had Art Green making it. That one was a tough one. I got to go with Trey Hawkins over Art Green, I think. I thought Hawkins, when I looked at the data and everything like that, and also looked at some film, I think Hawkins maybe gets the edge there. So I don't have Art Green making my 53. My corners, I have Adebo, Banks, Flott, Hawkins, Phillips, and Nick Jones. Nick Jones making it for specials. Now, as far as who's going to win the starting cornerback 2 job, I think it goes to Banks. All right. Banks, I don't believe played last night. Part of the, keeping the starters out. So that was kind of an indication, I thought, of as to how they're thinking. And it was how we expected it to go, to be honest with you. So really no surprise there. But the Giants roster, of course, will be whittled down. Tuesday, 4 o'clock is the deadline. Just remember one thing I'll leave you with before we wrap it up here on Locked on Giants. As you hear of guys getting cut throughout the day, nothing is final until 4 o'clock, because a guy might be cut, but then there might be a last minute trade for that guy. So that can sort of alter how things look moving forward. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, if a guy is traded or cut, it means he's not on the roster. I get that, but it's just something to keep in mind when you start seeing the leaks of who's making the roster and who is not. So that's going to be, as always, an interesting scenario. The Giants are going to have a very, very difficult list of decisions to make. And just looking ahead, what we'll do for the roster review show, we'll also take a look at the guys that don't make it and who might get picked up elsewhere. Because in the past, how many times could you say the Giants had guys that they cut that caught on elsewhere? It was very rare. This year, I don't think it's going to be as rare. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. All right, Giant fans, before we say goodbye, let me thank you again for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked on Giants podcast. And if you made us your first listen of the day, we appreciate that as well. For your next listen, well, NFL fantasy draft season is here. So go check out the Locked on Fantasy Football podcast with hosts Vinny Iyer and Michelle Madjuk. Listen every day to prep for your fantasy draft and become the most informed manager so that you can take home your league's trophy this season. Find Locked on Fantasy Football on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, Giant fans, have a great weekend. I'll see you again on Monday.